Hello everybody, in today's video we're going to be learning how to solve equations by factoring. Now in a previous video we did solving equations when it was already factored for you. Now this time we're going to have to do that. I haven't seen your blanket, Gwen. This time we're going to have to factor before we solve. So here we go, folks. Alright, so let's take a look at our first one. Now again, as I said in the previous video, our steps that we did before right over here have not changed. Okay, we're going to start by making sure one side of the equation is 0. Then you're going to factor. Then we're going to pull the pieces apart, set them to 0, and then solve the equation. Okay, so those are our 5 steps. Alright, so step number 1, make sure one side is 0. So again, we need to have, and in time we're solving by factoring, one side of this equation has to be 0. So in this case, we already have that done, so we're set to go. So now what I usually do is I'm going to parenthesis up around all this to remind myself that's what's going to be factored here. Okay. Now step 2. This is going to be the most aggravating part of this process, factor. Because like I said, you now know a couple ways to factor. We have taking out just GCF. We have the PS2. We have the slide. Okay. We have difference of squares. Okay. Or it might be GCF with a combo of any of those other 3. Okay. So again, we have to be very cautious, and this is what's aggravating about this process is you have to know what you have in order to factor. So let's quickly look at that. Okay, so let's take a look at PS2. Now to factor using PS2, to factor using PS2, the equation has to look like x squared plus bx plus c. Okay, so PS2, remember we have 3 pieces with nothing in front of x squared, or technically there's a 1 here that we typically don't use. Okay, then there was the slide. Also, you could use grouping depending on your teacher. Okay, and that looks like this, where we have ax squared plus bx plus c. Now again, students will say, well, gee, what's the difference? The difference is this. With PS2, this has to be a 1. It can't be anything but 1. With a slide or grouping method, this can be any other number, including 1 if you learned only grouping or slide to do this. But again, this A can be anything, a 3, a 7, a negative 12, a 14, etc., etc. So you need to be able to identify that since I've got 3 pieces with the leader in front, that is easily going to be a slide or a grouping method. Then we had difference of squares, okay, where we have a squared minus b squared, okay, where the first term, we have 2 terms, unlike the other instances where we had 3. So we have 2 terms, and again, the lead piece is a perfect square. You have a minus sign, and then we have the last piece is a perfect square. So that's how you tell what you're dealing with here. No, it keeps erasing on me. Okay, so those are the 3 types of factoring, and again, greatest common factors, you're just taking out what all multiple that all the pieces share. Alright, so let's start. So again, looking at what I have 3 pieces with nothing in front of the square, which tells me that I am gonna use the PS2. Yeah. Product, again, it's going to be right here, so positive 80. Okay. My sum is right here, the positive 24. So now, the hardest part of this process, the 2 numbers that multiply to 80 but add to 24. Okay? Now again, remember, if you get stuck, list off the multiples of the product. 1 and 80. Will that add to 24? No. 2 and 40. Nope. 3 doesn't work, but 4 and 20, that adds to 24, so we have our numbers. Okay, so we're going to have 20 and 4. Okay, so now I need 24 when I add them together. Okay, so these both have to be positive. And again, remember, folks, that when we're trying to do this, besides listening to Baby Shark, okay, is we're going to do our check. So let's do 20 times 4. Is that positive 80? Yes, it is. Is 20 plus 4 24? Yep. So we know we're good. So we're going to set up our parentheses. Still equal to 0. So we're going to have x plus 20, x plus 4. Okay, so step 2 is done. We factored. Now step 3, pull the pieces apart. So all we do is we take our parentheses and separate them. X plus 20 over here, x plus 4 over here. Set the pieces to 0. Equals 0, equals 0. And then solve the equations. Minus 20. So x is negative 20. Here, minus the 4. X equals negative 4. And there's your two solutions. Okay, so again, a little bit more work than the last time, but that's okay. All right, let's go to the next one. All right, so we take a look at this. All right, so let's follow our process. Step 1, make sure one side's 0. We've got that. Step 2 says to factor. Now, I'm going to put this in parentheses. I've got 3 pieces with a leader in front of the square. So that tells me I'm either going to use the slide or grouping, depending on how you've done this. Okay, so I'm going to use the grouping method here. So multiply front to back, you get plus 6. Okay. Now, so we're going to set this up. 2x squared dash x plus 3 equals 0. Now here's where we do our mini PS2. Okay. Our product is what we just multiplied. We got positive 6. Our sum is right here, which is negative 7. So the two numbers that multiply to 6 but add to negative 7 are going to be negative 6 and negative 1. Remember, with grouping method, this is what goes on the line. Negative 6, negative 1. Now we're going to parenthesis up. Okay. And remember, at this point, now we're going to set up our parentheses like this. We're going to take out the GCFs. Okay. So looking at this first parenthesis, greatest common factor I can take out is a 2. And between x squared and x, I can take out an x. So dividing it, 2x squared divided by 2x is x. Negative 6x divided by 2x is negative 3. Now, let's go here, take out GCF on this guy. Or again, common trick that I teach my students is we're going to take this last piece and divide it by this. And that tells me what's supposed to go on the line. So 3 divided by negative 3 is negative 1. And now I divide the pieces in this parenthesis by the negative 1. So negative 1x divided by negative 1 is positive x. 3 divided by negative 1 is negative 3. Now remember, for grouping method, these parentheses here and here have to match. If they don't, something's wrong and you need to go back and fix something. So since they match, we're going to set up our two parentheses. Okay, so our lead piece is x minus 3. So that takes care of these guys. The other one is going to be these guys right here, the garbage on the outside. So 2x minus 1. Okay, I'm going to shrink this down a little bit so we can work. Now our next steps. So that was factoring. Now pull the pieces apart. So let's separate. We're going to have x minus 3, 2x minus 1. Set the pieces to 0. Equals to 0, equals to 0. And now solve. So this one I'm going to add 3. X equals 3. Here I'm going to add the 1. So 2x is equal to 1. Divide by 2. So x is 1. Oops, 1/2. And there's that. Okay. Alright, a lot of work on that one again. And again, if you're not certain on the factoring methods, make sure you go back and look at some of the earlier videos I've done on those factoring types, because you need to make sure you're familiar with all these factoring types. Let's go to the next one. Alright, now this one, very similar to the last one, only this time I am going to do slide method here. So, first things first, does one side of the equation equal 0? Yes. Next step, let's go to factor. So I've got 3 pieces, leader in front, so that tells me I'm going to use the slide. But again, also remember too, I didn't even think of it here because I already know what's going on. Always, when you're factoring, remember the first thing we always look for is greatest common factor, which we didn't have here. Because if that will make your life a little bit easier, you should definitely take that out first. Okay, so now, what we're going to do, let's do the slide. So I'm going to multiply front to back. I get -15. Okay, so put in our slide, and let's get rid of the -5. We don't need it anymore. And we're going to do our mini PS2. Product is -15. My sum is +14. So my two numbers, see, two numbers that multiply to 15 but subtract to 14 are going to be +15, -1. And again, we don't run away, even though Baby Shark said to. Alright, so here we go. Let's parenthesis up. Yeah, Baby Shark. So we're going to have x plus 15, x minus 1. See the fun you get to have when you're trying to educate with a 2-year-old next to you? Alright, so now, remember, big part of the slide. Since you did the slide, remember we have to divide by our lead coefficient. That was the 3. Now I'm going to show you something a little different with the slide method when we're solving versus factoring. Now we're going to still reduce this guy because 15 over 3 is 3. So x plus 5. Now normally with slide method when we're factoring, I would say, alright, try to reduce this fraction, but we can't. So what we would do then is we would scooch the 3 in front of the x. And you can still do that if you're comfortable doing that. But realize if I do that, it's going to be more work for me. And I'm going to kind of set this up over here. X plus 5, 3x minus 1. And again, I'll show you what I'm talking about. I'll come back to that. But what I usually do is I keep the 3 here when it's an equation. And you'll see why in a minute. But like I said, if you've learned and you're more comfortable moving the 3 in front of the x, you're more than welcome to do that. It's just going to mean an extra step of work for you in the end. And like I said, I will demonstrate that over here. All right, so now at this point, I'm going to shrink this down a little bit. Whoop. All right, so now we're going to pull the pieces apart. X plus 5, x minus 1/3. I'm going to set the pieces to 0. Yeah, I'm writing in blue. And then I solve, so I'm going to minus the 5. So x equals -5. Now here, I'm going to just add the 1/3. Because again, I'm just adding 1/3 to 0, so it doesn't really do very much. So x is 1/3. And you're done. Now, like I said, if you were not comfortable keeping that 3 where it is, again, it's the same idea. Okay, so like I said, we're going to pull the pieces apart. X plus 5 and 3x minus 1. We set the pieces to 0. And we solve. So again, we're going to minus the 5. So x equals -5, just like we got before. Now here, like I said, this is where the extra step's going to be. We're going to start by adding the 1. So 3x is equal to 1. And then we divide by 3's. So x equals 1/3. So that was the extra step. You had to move the 1 and then you divided by the 3. But other than that, you know, you still get the same answer. So again, my advice would be do whatever you're most comfortable doing. If you feel comfortable that you can handle keeping the 3 there, like I did over here, do that. If you don't like that because frankly, you know, you got used to just doing it the other way and moving it like we did here, okay, then you're more than welcome to do either way. It really doesn't matter. Okay? All right, let's move to the next one. All right, now this one. We do have something to worry about here, and hopefully all of you have already seen what that problem is. If not, let's discuss it. Okay, so let's start. Make sure one side of the equation is 0. It is. Whoops. Step 2 now says to factor. Now remember what I've said in earlier videos, folks. The lead term cannot be negative. That's what we have to worry about. So to fix that, when we start to factor, we're going to start with a GCF. Again, my greatest common factor I'm going to take out is -1. And then by doing that, I'm just going to change the sign. So 4x squared minus 12x minus 7 is equal to 0. Yeah, let's be careful with Garfield. And ouch! You bit me. Yeah, no, that's not funny. Okay, so now at this point, remember at this point, we're going to put the -1, our GCF, in a big red balloon, and it's going to float away for a while, because they all float down here. And now we focus on what's in the parenthesis. I've got 3 pieces with a leader in front of the square, which tells me I'm either going to use grouping or slide. Okay, I'm going to use, I did slide last time, so let's do grouping this time. So let's multiply front to back. I get -28. Okay. Okay, so let's set this up again. We're going to ignore this -1 right now. Okay. So we're going to have 4x squared dash x minus 7 is equal to 0. All right, so let's do our PS2. Okay, my product, didn't leave myself much room. -28 from here. My sum, -12. So, 2 numbers that multiply to 28 but subtract to 12 is going to be 14 and 2. Kind of a weird one. So we're going to have -14 and we're going to have +2. So those are what's going to go on the line, -14 and +2. Okay, now I'm going to parenthesis up. Okay. So we're going to do line parentheses equal to 0. All right, so let's start taking out GCF. From this first parenthesis, I can take out, between 4 and 14, I can take out a 2. Between x squared and x, I can take out x. So 4x squared divided by 2x is 2x. -14x divided by 2x is -7. Now for the second parenthesis, okay, I've got the 2x minus 7. So between 2 and 7, I really can't take anything. So I'm going to take a 1. And then with the x and nothing here, it's just x, or nothing. I can't take anything. So we're going to have 2x minus 7. Now, since these parentheses match, okay, that means this is a positive one. So we're going to keep it a plus. All right. So let's put our parentheses together. Our first parenthesis, remember, is all this. So we're going to have 2x minus 7. That's the first one. Second parentheses, all the garbage left over on the outside. So 2x plus 1 is equal to 0. Okay, now let's follow our process. We've now factored completely. So let's start. So we're going to have 2x minus 7, 2x plus 1. Okay, so let's pull the pieces apart. Set the pieces to 0. And now solve the equation. So here I'm going to start by adding 7s. So 2x is equal to 7. Shrink that. I'll just move this up. Okay, and then from there, we're going to divide everything by 2's. So x is equal to 7 halves. Over here, we're going to minus the 1. So 2x is equal to negative 1. Divide by 2's. So x is negative 1 half. So there's our two solutions. Okay. All right, a lot of work. Again, these things can be very lengthy in work. And again, like I said, if you're watching this video and you're not certain as the factoring methods, you need to go back and look at the videos that I have on the different factoring types, because you have to be familiar with them in order to be able to do this. All right, let's move on. All right, now this next one isn't too bad. Okay, so let's start off. First things first, make sure one side of the equation is 0. We do, it's right there. Now my next step says to factor. Now again, remember, anytime you're factoring, the first thing you should look for is GCF, because in this case, it's going to make your life so much easier. Watch this. Okay, so if I take out GCF, common multiple between 8 and 16 is 8. Between x squared and x, I can take out an x. So that leaves me inside 8x squared divided by 8x is x. 16x divided by 8x is 2. Now looking inside my parenthesis, since there's no exponents in there anymore, there's no more factoring to do. So just by taking out the GCF, I have shortened this thing tremendously, because now factoring is done, 0 is done, I'm already into the easy part now. Okay, so now let's pull these pieces apart. And yes, I know this is not in a parenthesis, but it's still, we have to pull it apart and solve it. So let's take out the 8x, move the x plus 2. Okay, set the pieces to 0, and now solve. Now here's where I see a lot of errors on something like this, because this is what students will do. Divide by 8, which is correct. You're supposed to do that. And they say, oh yeah, that's no solution, G. No, think about what's going on here. You're thinking of 8 divided by 0. That's true. That's no solution. But 0 divided by 8 is 0. X equaling 0, and x can be 0. Remember, x is a variable. It can be anything we want it to be. So if it wants to be 0, it can be 0. It's all right. Now we come over here, minus the 2. X is equal to negative 2. And there's that one. And you're done. Again, looking for GCF in solving these problems is going to make life so much easier for people. So please, always look for that first. All right, let's go to the next one. All right, now we got a big mess here. 4 pieces. Oh, no. All right, so let's get started. Okay, so first things first. Make sure one side is 0. We have it. Now, looking at what I have here to factor this, can I take GCF from all 4 pieces? The answer is no. It's tempting to do x, but again, this piece down here doesn't have an x, so we can't take out GCF. So as you know, the way to factor 4 pieces is we have to factor by grouping. So first and second, third and fourth, line, parenthesis equals 0. All right, so from this first parenthesis, what can I take out? I can take out x squared, leaving me x plus 3. Okay, now at this point, let's look at this. So I'm going to do plus 5, because again, I can take out a 5, leaving me x plus 3. So now we parenthesis up. Okay, we're going to have x plus 3 here. Going to have x squared plus 5 here. Okay. Now at this point, we're going to start solving this. So I'm going to pull the pieces apart. Set the pieces to 0. Now solve. Minus the 3. X equals negative 3. Now, I know we haven't done radicals yet, but I'm going to go through this one over here. You're not going to, if you're in my classes, you're not going to see anything like this yet. But again, and for those other people who don't have me as the teacher, you may have seen this before, so I'm just going to go over it. So again, we would still minus the 5. Minus the 5 here. So x squared is equal to negative 5. Now, to find x from x squared, we have to take the square root. X is equal to plus or minus, because you took the square root. But the problem is, you have a negative under the square root. So depending on what level you're at, okay, I know for my algebra 1s with something like this, here, let me shorten this up here, so, because we have a lot to do. Okay, for my algebra 1s and most algebra 1, okay, when you have x is equal to plus or minus square root of negative 5, most algebra 1s that I have seen, you say, well, you have a negative under the square root, it can't be done, so you would declare no solution on that part. Okay, so if you're in an algebra 1 and your teacher tells you that, that would be this. Again, if you're in an algebra 2, and most of the algebra 2s that I've seen, you've seen imaginary roots. So when x is equal to plus or minus radical negative 5, okay, you know that the negative under the radical is going to kick out as an I. So x would equal plus or minus I radical 5. Okay, so again, depending on your level here. I know this is a little advanced for Algebra 1 students. Again, like I said, with my students, you're not going to see a problem this intense. Okay, but you would probably see this as like a minus 4, which you could then do as difference of squares. But in case you didn't. Alright, so let's move on. Alright, let's take a look at this one. So x squared minus 100. So let's start the process. First things first, can I take, is one side 0? Yeah? Got your dump truck? It's on your head, huh? Okay, so we have 0, so it's good. Factor. Oh, my pen shut off. Hold on. So, oh man. So I've got 2 pieces. So since there's only 2 pieces, that tells me we might have difference of square here. So let's do our DOS checklist. I'll do this 2 ways. So we'll do the DOS checklist, and then I'll again remind you of solving this using PS2. So the DOS checklist starts. Is x squared a perfect square? Yes, it is. It even says in the name, square. Do you have a minus sign? Yes. Is 100 a perfect square? Yes. So we have difference of squares. So what we're going to do is we're going to do our groups. So x squared's perfect root is x and x. 100's perfect root is 10 and 10. And then we alternate our signs of minus plus. Now remember, difference of squares has the ability sometimes to be hidden within itself, so you always check your parentheses. But since my parentheses do not have any exponents in it, we're set. We can't factor any further. So now let's pull the pieces apart. X minus 10. X plus 10. Set them equal to 0. And now you solve. So add 10s So x is equal to 10. Minus the 10 here. So x equals negative 10. And there's your answer. Now, like I said, I would do this doing the PS2. So x squared minus 100 equals 0. Now remember, to do PS2, we have to have 3 pieces. And notice the middle x is missing. So we have to fill it with a 0. So x squared plus 0x minus 100 equals 0. So now we do our PS2. My product right here is negative 100. My sum in this case is going to be 0. And again, remember, when the sum is 0, that means the two numbers that you have to do for 100 have to be the exact same number. So it's going to be 10 and 10. And to give you 0 when you add them together, one has to be positive, the other has to be negative. So we're going to have x plus 10, x minus 10 is equal to 0. Let me shrink this. Okay. So now, pull the pieces apart. Set the pieces to 0. And solve what you got. So minus the 10s. So x equals negative 10 plus 10s. So x equals positive 10. Okay, so either way you get the same answer. It's just how you see the problem and how you take it down. Okay, so let's move on. All right, zero function. Again, we talked about this in another video. But again, remember, all the zero function does and all finding the zeros means, again, math people, again, we're tired of being bullied, picked on, spit at, tripped, given swirlies in high school. So their way to get back at people was to come up with interesting math things that take something very, very simple and makes it really complicated. Okay? So, using a zero function or finding all the zeros, all that says to do, remember, is we're going to take this f of x and change it to 0. That's what a zero function does. We're finding where the y values are 0, or in English, wherever the thing hits my x-axis, or where the graph of this function hits the x-axis, those are our solutions. Okay. So basically, all you have to do when you see zero function or find all the zeros, turn f of x to 0. All right, so now we start. Is one side 0? Yup. Next step says to factor this. So 0 is equal to, oops, let me erase that. Okay, so we're going to do we have 3 pieces to factor, nothing in front of the square, so that's a PS2. So my product is 33. My sum is negative 14. So the two numbers that do this, so what two numbers multiply to 33 but add to 14 is 11 and 3. My signs to give me negative 14 is negative 11 and negative 3. So 0 equals x minus 11, x minus 3. All right, so now that we're set, pull the pieces apart. X minus 11, x minus 3. Set the pieces to 0. Solve what you got. So I'm going to add 11s. So x is equal to 11. Add 3. X is 3. See? Again, no real difference in what we did before. The only difference was they used fancy mathematical mumbo jumbo and they replaced the 0 with f of x, which you're just going to change to 0 anyway. Other than that, it's the same garbage that we've been doing all this video. Alright, so let's move on. Alright, here we go. Let's scooch this up a little bit. Okay, so again, find the zeros, or use the zero function. So again, I'm going to change f of x to 0. 9x squared minus 12x plus 4. All right, so start the process. Does one side equal 0? Yes, it does. Step 2 says to factor this. Now, I look in my parenthesis. I've got 3 pieces with a leader in front. But before I do anything, I'm going to check for GCF. So between 9, 12, and 4, can I take GCF? No, I cannot. Okay, it's awfully tempting. Well, I hear a lot, well, gee, the 9 and the 12, I could take a 3. That's true, but remember, GCF, you have to share the same with every piece. The 4 eliminates the 3 as a possibility. So we now have to factor using, I'm going to use the slide. This time you can use grouping. So I'm going to multiply the front to back. Here we go. That's plus 36. Okay. Let me get rid of this. All right, so here we go. My product, positive 36. My sum, negative 12. The two numbers that make both P and S true. So the two numbers that multiply to 36 but add to 12 is 6 and 6. And the sign to give me negative 12, both negative. So 0 equals, we're going to have x minus 6, x minus 6. Again, do not write this as x minus 6 squared because that's going to make problems for you. Now, don't forget, we did the slide. And anytime you do the slide, we have to divide by the lead piece that we did the slide with in the first place. So I'm going to divide these by 9. Okay. Now remember to reduce the fractions. X minus, and I'm going to make this 2/3. And again, x minus 2/3. Now at this point, like I said earlier in the video, if you're the type of person you got used to doing the slide and scooching the 3's in front of the x's and then putting them to 0, you're perfectly fine to do that. Okay, you just have a little more work to do. Okay, but what I'm going to do, like I said before, is I'm going to keep those like that because they're easier to solve. So I'm going to start by separating them. X minus 2/3. X minus 2/3. Set the pieces to 0. Now I'm going to just solve the equation. So I'm going to add 2/3. So x is equal to 2/3. Again, because it's the same thing, I'm going to have x equals 2/3 again. Now, as I said in another video when we went over stuff like this before, know what your teacher wants for answers. Okay? Some teachers will say, just write x equals 2/3 and you're good. Some teachers will have you do a solution set. X is equal to 2/3, comma 2/3 again. Oh, it erased. Oh, come on. There. Some teachers will say you can write it as x equals 2/3 with double root or dr underneath it because the answer of 2/3 appeared twice. So again, know your teacher, know what they want, know what they're looking for when you're giving your answer set. Okay? Alright, so that's the end of this video. Again, hopefully you learned a lot. There was a lot of information here. There was a lot of baby shark earlier in this video. And again, that's what happens when you're trying to make a video when there's a 2-year-old dangling around you. So again, hopefully you learned a lot, and I will see you in the next video.